The metabolization of the Jinye, the organic liquids, involves a continuous process of separation between the clear and the turbid, both extracted from the essential energy of liquids. This process is colloquially called the rising of the clouds and descending of the rains, and occurs repeatedly in various zhangfu of the body until the final excretion of the turbid. This chain of transformation is termed the water pathway. The slides diagram you can see here aims to summarize what various classical Chinese medicine texts explain about this process. The clear breaths are absorbed and retained. The turbid, however, are descended and excreted. In each purification, the tendency of the clear or pure breaths is to ascend to the chest, the heart, the lungs, or the brain, while the turbid, in a downward movement, are successively conducted to the next filter: the stomach, the small intestine, the large intestine, and finally the bladder, to ultimately be eliminated to the exterior through the two lower yin orifices, the urethra and the anus. Su Wen states, clear yang exits through the upper orifices, turbid yin exits through the lower great orifices. According to Chinese medicine, the circulation of Jinye throughout the body follows the movements of qi. Essentially, the true water pathway is the essential energy of liquids. Each qi movement along this pathway is promoted by a specific zhangfu. The elaboration of breath depends on the middle jiao, from the subtle elements of nutrition that first reach the stomach. There, a primary transformation occurs, where part of the essence will be directed to the spleen. The fire transmitted by yuan qi, the energy belonging to the origin, warms the spleen and heats Liangmen, allowing it to extract the quintessence of food, which is transferred to the spleen to ascend to the upper jiao. The rest of the pre-digested food bolus is directed to the small intestine. But let's pause here. The stomach has a function of elaboration at all levels because it receives cereals and water and macerates, ferments, and absorbs them. Moreover, everything destined to nourish the being, both of a physical and emotional nature, is absorbed primarily by the stomach. In the West, we have translated its Zhu-Yang-Ming meridian as stomach, focusing solely on the organ. But in fact, all phenomena of this first phase of incorporating the external world resonate on the meridians of the Yang-Ming energy level. Therefore, many pathologies involving digestive or stomach disorders express something that the person psychologically cannot swallow, cannot digest, or cannot assimilate. Hence, as therapists, when this type of sentiment is associated with physical pathology, we must consider this global absorption function of the stomach. Su Wen 11 states, the stomach is the sea of liquids and cereals, the great source of the six fu. Located together with the gallbladder in the central territory, it is also the source of posterior heaven qi of the kidneys. I have to comment here that in my playlist about the gallbladder resonances, this concept of central territory is extensively explained. But let's go on. The stomach governs the capacity to fill itself, to self-nourish, and also to feel of oneself. In fact, one of its acupoints, stomach 25, located at the level of the navel, precisely in the human situation between heaven, the aspirations, and earth, the needs and impulses, is a point resonating with the possibility of feeling fulfilled as human between heaven and earth. Referred to as the Great Granary, Da Kang, or Market of Supply Place, Shi, we know that the stomach is the sea of qi and blood, the sea of waters and grains, the sea of the 5 Zhang and the 6 Fu. It is also called the root of the 5 Sang and the 6 Fu. This implies that the stomach is crucial for the renewal of both yin and yang in the body. And for this reason, both Renmai and Chongmai are closely linked to it. This can be observed in their respective acupoints. For example, there are Renmai points like Renmai 10, Renmai 12, and Renmai 13, intimately connected to the stomach. Conversely, stomach 25, stomach 30, stomach 37, stomach 38, and stomach 39 acupoints are crossing points with Chongmai. The stomach, like the large intestine or the spleen, can also be affected by worries and excessive rumination, leading to a stagnation of its energy, manifested as heartburn, belching, nausea, etc. In fact, the visual effort of excessive intellectual work sustained over the years, remember that its meridian starts in the eye, can also cause stomach qi deficiency. Obviously, the stomach can also be affected by anger, frustration, or resentment. However, this would occur through the affectation of other jiangfu, not directly. The points that, according to Jean-Marc Espy, govern this visceral function of the stomach are the Mu and Shu points. We all know Renmai 12 as the stomach Mu point. However, Jean-Marc Espy considers that this function is performed by a stomach 21. And to broaden the perspective, Nguyen Van Gogh considered large intestine 6 as the stomach's Mu point also. Let's briefly discuss the 3 Mu points of the stomach, so we can grasp some nuances on which one might be worth trying first in case of pathology in this Fu. The commonly accepted Mu point of the stomach is Renmai 12, also a Mu point of the middle jiao, the midpoint of the 3 folds of the stomach, the concentration point of the spleen energy, not to mention the knot point of the Tai-Yin energetic level, among other things we won't delve into now. Renmai 12, Zhongwan, or central stomach, has very few clinical indications in the upper part of the body. Epilepsy, anosmia, and barely some oral alterations. In the chest we find asthma, dyspnea, suffocation phlegm, as well as heartburn and heart-related issues. From here we move to purely stomach-related clinical aspects. Epigastric pain, gastric distension, reflux, regurgitations, food stagnation, nausea, and vomiting. There is also hiccups, that is, a diaphragm blockage. And then the pathology becomes abdominal, sudden swelling, abdominal pain and distension, intestinal pathology, rumbling, subintestinal occlusion, colic, diarrhea, constipation, with stools that can be dark or hard, although there can also be incontinence. Also responds to gynecological symptoms, which in general are due to empty cold. It is called the single point for anuria and constipation. That is, matters don't circulate. In general, the clinic, apart from asthenia and fatigue, which are to be expected as the stomach Mu point, there are skin alterations. It's also labeled as the master point of tumors and cysts, and as such treats warts, lipomas, and skin thickening. Let's not forget that Renmai is adjacent to the Tai Yin energetic level, so in a way we can say it belongs to it. In fact, its key point, lung 7, is in this energetic level, in that more superficial yin that should open to the exterior. That's why when Tai Yin doesn't open to the exterior, on the skin, we can observe all this clinical presentation of skin tumors, cysts, warts, lipomas, and thickening, manifesting this lack of release of superficial yin to yang. There are radical differences in perspective. Giovanni Maciuccia and Peter Deadman tells us that it tonifies the spleen, stomach, qi gently, regularizes the middle jiao, qi, and eliminates dumbness. On the other hand, Philippe Sionneau tells us that it mobilizes and drains the stomach qi, indirectly favoring the functions of the center. That is, in his opinion, what the Guanyin point treats are the fullness conditions in the intestines, dissolving mucosities. The authors of the French Acupuncture Association approach it differently. Jean-Marc Espy says that, first of all, Renmai 12 is a point that opens Tai Yin to the exterior, which, as we've explained, would account for its specific clinical indications at the skin level. Espy also asserts that Renmai 12 governs the distribution of yang throughout the body. Hence, in its pathology, there'll be a fullness of yang in the center, but with a yang vacuity at the periphery. This makes sense. All the blockages and pathologies at the abdominal level seem to reflect a picture of fullness. However, at the general level, the point treats fatigue and asthenia, as well as at the psychic level, which I hadn't commented on. It can also induce sadness or depression, which happens when energy doesn't circulate. On the contrary, other psychic indications of Renmai 12 don't precisely reflect a yang vacuity. For example, as the classical texts say, there can be injury by the 7 emotions, anxiety, due to non-metabolization of a traumatic event. We'll discuss this now. Obsessions, excessive thinking, insomnia or psychosis. When they talk about anxiety due to non-metabolization of a traumatic event, we can think about the stomach's function of absorbing the external world, not only at a physical but also at a psychic level. And of course, that blockage, which is also energetic, generates dampness. The obsessions, the excess of thinking, also described in the pathology of Renmai 12. Espy also claims that this point, additionally, governs the middle jiao. I imagine because its main ideogram, Zhongwan, central stomach, indicates it as such. Still, according to Jean-Marc Espy, Renmai 12 is linked to the Jing essence as fulfillment. Let's not forget that the root of the spleen stomach yang is in the kidney essence. But Espy refers here to the psychological aspect of the point. Its vocation would be to materialize the essential nature of being, that is, to feel fulfilled. Why? We can think that due to its central function, human, Renmai 12 between points Renmai 13 and Renmai 10, representing the upper, heaven, and lower earth, nuclei of the stomach, respectively. It can connect heaven and earth within oneself. There's another point, stomach 25, that according to Espy also accomplishes this action. And stomach 25 because it's precisely on the horizontal level of the navel, that central point of the body between heaven above and earth below, hence also at a human level. And it seems reasonable. Both points, despite being located in different meridians, each in their way, share the commonality of their location in a central register, human. The other considered mu point of the stomach is stomach 21, Liangmen, lintel of the door. Almost all the clinical aspects of stomach 21 are at the abdominal level. Above, we only find tinnitus, palpitations, and a bit of a blockage in the chest and flanks. Stomach 21 treats all stomach pathologies, especially due to excess. As Anglo-Saxon authors say, it regulates the stomach, especially in fullness conditions. This point's dynamic would favor the passage between the stomach and the spleen. This explains symptoms like anorexia, halitosis, belching, nausea, vomiting. Symptoms not only gastric but also, according to Solidemorant, pancreatic. Let's continue. Epigastric pain, spasms of the cardia, acute gastritis, gastric ulcers, irritable stomach, difficult digestions, acute or chronic indigestion, heartburn after meals, eats without assimilating and loses weight, pancreatic insufficiency. Then at the lower abdominal level, there are liantary stools, gastroenteritis, also acute, as well as various types of diarrhea. At a general level, as symptoms of stomach 21, there's practically only weakness. Among French-speaking authors, Bernard Ziegler tells us that REM 12 treats undigested past events as an action of the point. And Jean-Marc Espy says it governs the beginning of yang mutation. Stomach 21 is indicated in agitation, tension, that is, in a person who can't empty their emotions, just as they couldn't empty their stomach. It also treats insomnia after midnight, and some authors wonder if it's due to overeating. Now, it should be somewhat clear what its diagram Liangmen, lintel of the door, refers to, right? And still at the Yang-Ming energetic level, we encounter another point that has also been advocated by Nguyen Van Gy as the stomach's mu point, large intestine 6, which is the large intestine's luo point named Pianli, divergent passage. As we'll see, there are numerous Fu mu points on this energetic level, Zhu Yang Ming, which has been translated as stomach. As we commented in one of the videos from the playlist An Introduction to Acupuncture, in which we talked, as an example, about stomach 41, and with it about Zhu Yangming's stomach. This major meridian has a global function of absorbing the external world, both at the physical and psychic level. Because let's not forget that although the stomach is the organ that initiates the water pathway, it is not the only one performing it, nor the one that culminates it. We'll talk much more extensively about Pianli when we address the luomai, but in large intestine 6, we find a more varied clinic that partly affects the large intestine's trajectory, with pathologies at the level of gums, teeth, or throat, as well as alteration of the scapula, shoulder, or arm, which this meridian traverses. There are also symptoms higher up in Pianli: dizziness, epilepsy, that is, wind, headaches, eye redness, and pain. In the chest, sensation of constriction or blockage of the diaphragm and ribs, although we won't discuss this because it's mainly related to the large intestine's luo function. So we'll focus on the symptom gastralgia, which, although not listed among the clinical indications of the classical texts, that can't be exhaustive because they never end, I've had occasion to observe has been resolved with isolated stimulation of this acupoint. There is also a large intestine's qi disturbance, exaggerated peristalsis with flatulence, oliguria, difficult urination, and also polyuria. All this speaks of a disturbance of the water pathway. Anglo-Saxon authors already tell us that Pianli is a point that opens the Jinye Pathway, that expels wind, as we saw before above, and that clears heat. Well, there are small heat symptoms among its clinical indications, like eye redness and pain, or further down, dry throat and cystitis. Although, truth can be told, heat doesn't predominate in large intestines 6 clinic. In the Banquet des Points, French monthly meetings dedicated to acupoints, the authors of the French Acupuncture Association thought that what Pianli, which is a Luo point, treated was primarily fullness in the piao, the surface. That is, someone with absence of sweating, which is among the clinical indications, due to a wind-cold pathogen that generates heat release. I don't wish to delve deeper into this point because it would lead us into another mental dynamic. I'll just take this opportunity to comment that Carlo di Stanislao tells us that passing through the sensory organs, the large intestine's luo is related to perception. You all know that the luomai can present clinics due to excess or deficiency. Well, according to Carlo di Stanislao, the patient can be very active and impatient, unable to stop, with difficulty in processing information. There's exuberance, irritability, logorrhea, delirious, mania, etc. Or just the opposite, little desire to speak, mutism, and psychic rigidity. And Paul Couderc depicts this patient with his usual pictorial style. His vision of the world and others is limited, with a rictus of a smile, like the top student enclosed in the sarcophagus of his rigid determination. The patient Pianli, let's remember now the meaning of the ideogram, divergent passage, although the world doesn't fit within his ideals, remains faithful to the path he has traced. And in an attempt to escape, needs movement and physical activity. After all, it's about a Yang patient, which is a Yang that can't enter the interior when altered. On the contrary, regarding its shoe point, there is no discussion or additions. It is bladder 21. And to conclude this digression, I want to mention that the stomach is related to life and death. Suen 19 tells us, the breath of the 5 Zhang is always mixed with that of the stomach and cannot act alone. Those who have it thus mixed have a long life. If Zheng Qi, the correct Qi, of a Zhang appears alone without being mixed with the stomach, that is death. Indeed, the stomach fills and empties, empty and full, life and death. That's why in classical text it's stated that stomach qi too weak seals an imminent death.